By the time I got back to the gate in Puerto Vallarta, my son was already gone. Not off getting coffee, not in the restroom, gone. I was still holding 2 bottles of water and a paper bag with snacks Daniel had asked me to buy. Emily's sweater was no longer on the chair. Daniel's carry-on was gone too. The whole waiting area looked wrong in a way that made my stomach tighten before anyone spoke. Then the woman at the desk checked her screen, looked at me and said, "Sir, they boarded a different flight. That was how my son left me in Mexico." Tell me honestly, would that have made sense to you? For a second, I just stood there with the bag in my hand. Daniel was 38 years old. He was not confused. He had asked me for water less than 10 minutes earlier. He had watched me walk away. He knew exactly where I was. He also knew I was 67 and did not move through airports the way I used to. Still, he and Emily had taken an earlier flight to Denver and left me behind without a word. And that still was not the worst part. I said, "What do you mean, a different flight?" The gate agent kept her voice careful. "Your family rebooked, sir. They are no longer on this departure. My son is with my daughter-in-law?" "Yes, sir." "And they left without me?" She paused. "It appears so." That was the moment something cold settled in my chest. The trip itself had been Daniel's idea. He said we all needed time together. He said Seattle had become tense. He said a few days in Puerto Vallarta might help us reset. I wanted to believe him. Daniel and Emily had been living in my house in Seattle without paying rent. I kept telling myself that was temporary. I kept telling myself families had rough seasons. I kept telling myself patience would fix what pride and distance had damaged. A father can tell himself those things for far too long. In the months before that trip, Daniel had started acting like the house belonged to him in ways that were easy to dismiss one at a time. He made decisions without asking. He used phrases like, "We should probably handle this," when the subject was my own property. He asked about neighborhood prices, repairs, and sales nearby. He spoke like a man planning ahead, but never said for what. One night in the kitchen, he leaned against the counter and said, "You should let us handle more of the house stuff." I asked, "What house stuff?" "The practical stuff," he said. "Bills, paperwork, future decisions. It's my house," I said. He gave a small smile. "I know that." Emily said, "He's just trying to help." That sentence came up often. "He's just trying to help." It sounds harmless until you hear what it excuses. A few weeks before we flew to Mexico, Daniel came to me with his laptop already open. He moved like he was in a hurry, but not enough to look suspicious. Just enough to keep me from slowing things down. He said, "Dad, I need a quick signature." "For what?" "It's an update for medical decision paperwork," he said, "just in case." I looked at the screen, but not long enough. "Why now?" "Because we should have done it already." Emily was sitting nearby. She said, "It'll take 2 seconds." I should have insisted on reading every line. Instead, I let the moment move me along. Daniel pointed to a place on the screen. "Right there," he said. So I signed. Maybe you see it differently. At the time, I thought I was signing something routine. That memory did not bother me immediately. It only sat somewhere in the back of my mind, attached to other little things I had chosen not to fight over. Daniel had developed a way of moving me past details. He used words like standard, simple, nothing major. He always seemed to be steering me towards speed and away from questions. At the time, I told myself I was keeping peace in the house. Looking back, I was giving him room. At the gate in Puerto Vallarta, the agent asked if I needed assistance. That pulled me back. I set the water on a seat and reached for my passport. It should have been in the inner pocket of my jacket. My wallet should have been in my right pocket. My phone should have been there too. All 3 were gone. I checked again, then again. "No," I said. The agent looked at me. "Sir, my passport was here." I searched every pocket with both hands, then checked the paper bag as if that could make sense. Nothing. Daniel had not only left me in another country, he had made sure I could not simply follow him. He had taken the 3 things I needed most and left me with $20 in cash. When I counted it, the amount almost insulted me. It was enough to remind me how little he thought I would be able to do. That was when I understood this was planned. I said to the agent, "My son took my passport, my wallet and phone too." Her expression changed. "You need airport security." "I know," I said, but I knew something else as well. Men do cruel things in anger. This was not that. This had shape. This had steps. This had thought behind it. The missing passport, the missing wallet, the missing phone, the earlier flight, the laptop signature, the months of talk about the house. Each piece by itself could be explained away. Together, they did not want explaining. They wanted naming. Security took one report. Airport police took another. I gave them the facts until the facts lost all softness. My son and daughter-in-law had traveled with me. My son sent me away from the gate for water and snacks. When I returned, they were gone. My passport, wallet, and phone were missing. I had $20 and no identification. Saying it aloud made the whole thing even uglier. One officer asked, "Do you believe your son stole those items?" "Yes," I said. "Did he have access to them?" "He was my son," I said. "He had access to everything." That answer stayed with me. I was directed to the U.S. consulate for emergency travel documents. The process was slow. It involved waiting, questions, forms, and the kind of humiliation that settles in when you have to explain how your own child trapped you. I am not saying that for pity. I am saying it because shame is useful to people like Daniel. They expect you to hide what happened because telling it makes you feel foolish. I decided very quickly I would not protect him that way. While I waited, I went back over the trip. Daniel had been unusually pleasant in Puerto Vallarta. Too pleasant. He insisted on handling travel details. He kept telling me to relax. He kept saying, "I've got it, Dad." At the time, I thought he was trying to improve things between us. Sitting there alone, I saw a different possibility. What if the trip had never been about family at all? That question sat there and would not move. I replayed the laptop signature again and again. I could still see Daniel's finger tapping the screen. I could hear him say, "Right there." I could hear Emily say, "It'll take 2 seconds." I could hear my own voice asking too little because I did not want another argument in my own home. Trust does not collapse all at once. It gets used against you in ordinary moments. At one point, I said to myself, maybe this is only about money. Then I answered my own thought. No, it's also about control. That was the moment everything changed for me. Daniel had been living in my house for free, but acting larger in it every month. He had been testing how much I would ignore to avoid conflict. He had been watching where I still trusted him, and now he had taken that trust and turned it into a weapon. Would you have trusted him after that? By the next morning, I was no longer confused. I was no longer hoping this had some innocent explanation waiting for me. I was angry, not loud, not reckless, the kind of angry that gets very still. And I knew I was getting back to Seattle before Daniel did. Getting emergency travel documents did not feel like rescue. It felt like work I had been forced into by my own son. Every question at the consulate made the truth harder to soften. Name, age, residence, missing passport, missing wallet, missing phone. How did it happen? Each answer sounded cleaner than what it meant. The facts were simple. The betrayal inside them was not. A staff member asked, "Do you know where your son is now?" "Denver, apparently," I said. "Do you expect him to contact you?" "No," I said. "If he wanted me reached, he would not have taken my phone." That silence after I said it told me how bad it sounded to someone hearing it fresh. I kept seeing Daniel's face in the airport before I walked away for the water. He had not looked nervous. He had not looked guilty. He looked calm. That bothered me more than anything else. A man improvising would show cracks. Daniel had been settled, which meant he believed the plan was already secure. While I waited for the paperwork, memories kept lining up in ways they had not before. Weeks earlier, after that laptop signature, Daniel had started moving through my house with more confidence. He would open drawers in my study and say he was looking for something else. He would stand near my desk too long. Once, I came into the room and found him studying papers he had no reason to touch. When I asked what he was doing, he barely blinked. "Just cleaning up a little," he said. "My desk doesn't need cleaning," I told him. He shrugged. "You keep everything," Emily said from the doorway. "He's organizing." I answered, "I didn't ask for that." Nothing exploded. That was part of the problem. Daniel liked living in that space where nothing looked dramatic enough to confront. It let him keep pushing. Back in Seattle before the trip, he had also started talking about the future in a way that always made me sound temporary. He would say things like, "This place needs a long-term plan," or "Someone has to think ahead." He never said directly that I was in the way. He did not need to. The implication did enough work. One afternoon, he said, "You should make sure everything is settled legally." I asked, "What exactly are you worried about?" "I'm not worried," he said. "I'm being practical." Emily added, It's for the family. That phrase again. For the family. It can mean care. It can also mean pressure dressed up as duty. By the time my emergency passport was ready, I had reached a conclusion I did not want but could not avoid. Daniel had not stranded me only to hurt me. He had stranded me because he needed me out of the way. The question was what he expected to do with that time. That was the thought I carried on to the flight back to Seattle. I remember sitting there with the emergency documents in my hand, looking at them harder than necessary. Paper had become the whole story now. The paper on Daniel's laptop, the paper that let me get home. The papers I had not yet seen but knew were waiting somewhere. I did not know the exact shape of the trap, but I knew the trap had paperwork inside it. That was enough. When I landed in Seattle, I did not call Daniel. I did not try to warn him. I went straight home. The house looked the same from the outside. That almost made it worse. A familiar place can feel like a lie when you already know something inside it has changed. I unlocked my own front door and stepped in carefully, not because I feared violence, but because I no longer trusted appearances. The first thing I noticed was space. Not silence. Space. Objects that had always anchored a room were gone. Valuable items were missing. The absence was obvious the way a pulled tooth is obvious to the tongue. Daniel had not cleared the house out, but he had taken enough that the pattern showed. He had treated my home like inventory. I stood in the living room and said out loud, "All right." There was nobody there to hear it. I said it anyway because I needed my own mind steady. I checked room after room, missing items, disturbed storage, drawers that had been handled. Then I went to my desk. That was where I found the legal file. It was sitting there almost openly, as if Daniel had begun to believe he no longer needed to hide anything. Inside were documents related to my house. I read slowly. The words did not need much interpretation. A deed of gift, transfer of ownership, my name, Daniel's name, my signature. I sat down because I felt my legs change beneath me. The paper on the laptop had not been medical paperwork. It had been my house. That was the payoff for the airport. That was why he had needed me in Mexico, helpless and delayed. He wanted time. He wanted possession. He wanted me returning to a different reality than the one I had left. I looked at the signature again and again. It was mine. That was the cruelty of it. He had not forged my name. He had tricked me into giving it to him. Fraud wrapped in trust looks clean until you pull it apart. You tell me, was I supposed to ignore that? I did not tear anything. I did not shout. I got my phone? No, that thought hit me first. My phone was still gone. So I used what was available in the house, and I photographed every page of that file, every signature line, every title, every piece of language that showed what Daniel had done. I photographed the rooms with missing valuables. I photographed what I could prove before he returned and tried to explain it away. Then I contacted lawyer Lisa Chen. I remember her office clearly because it was the first room since the airport where someone listened without trying to steer me past the facts. I laid out the photographs. I explained the trip, the missing passport, the missing wallet, the missing phone, the earlier flight to Denver, the emergency passport, the house, the file, the signature on the laptop. Lisa looked at the documents for a long time before she spoke. She said, "If this deed is on record or otherwise presented as valid, Daniel will claim legal ownership." I asked, "Even if he lied to get the signature?" "Yes," she said. "Unless we prove fraud. So he stole my house with a screen and a finger." She met my eyes. "Then we prove that is what happened." That was the first steady sentence I had heard in days. She explained what mattered. The signature was real, which made the case dangerous, but the circumstances mattered too. If Daniel had misrepresented the document, if he had deceived me about what I was signing, then the transfer could be challenged. I asked what I should do first. "Protect the property," Lisa said. "Preserve every piece of evidence, and make a police report about the Mexico incident and the missing items from the house." "I'm doing both," I said. She nodded. "Good. Would you have stayed quiet after hearing that?" I went to the police and reported the abandonment in Mexico, the stolen passport, the stolen wallet, the stolen phone, and the missing valuables from my home. I gave them the clearest version I had. Daniel did not leave me by accident. Daniel took the items that could help me return. Daniel used a deceptive signature to transfer the house. Daniel removed valuables while I was stranded. Each point led to the next. After that, I changed every lock on the house. The keys mattered now in a way they never had before. Daniel had used access like ownership for months. I was done leaving that line blurry. When the old locks came out and the new ones went in, I felt something settle inside me. Not relief. Relief would come later if it came at all. This was simpler than that. It was a boundary. I stood in the hallway that evening with the new key in my hand and looked around my own house. Daniel had treated my trust like paper. He had treated my absence like permission. He had treated my home like a prize he had nearly secured. He was about to find out he had come back too late. I knew Daniel and Emily would return, expecting the front door to open. That image stayed with me all day. His hand on the old key. The pause when it failed. The quick second before anger turned into performance. He had spent months moving through my house like the future had already been handed to him. I wanted the first thing he felt in Seattle to be resistance. I did not have to wait long. I heard the car, then footsteps, then the old key scraping uselessly at the lock. Once, twice, a third time, harder than before. I walked to the door but did not open it right away. I let him feel it. Then Daniel knocked. "Dad?" I stayed where I was. "Yes." "The key isn't working." "I know." There was a pause outside. Then Emily said, "Michael, open the door." I unlocked it and opened it only as far as I needed. Daniel's face changed when he saw me standing there. Not shock that I was home. Something closer to irritation that I was home early enough to matter. He said, "Why did you change the locks?" I answered, "Because you left me in Mexico and took my passport." Emily looked at Daniel before she looked at me. That told me more than her words ever did. Daniel said, "You're making this bigger than it is. Bigger than being stranded in another country with $20? He exhaled hard. "You got home, didn't you?" That sentence still sits in my mind like a stain. I said, "You took my wallet, my phone, my passport." Daniel answered, "You can't prove that." I looked at him for a long second. "I also know what you had me sign." Something in his face tightened then. Not guilt, calculation. Emily said quietly, "Michael, let's talk inside." "No," I said. "You can talk right there." That was the first real shift in power. The doorway was no longer his. The house was not his. The conversation was not his either. Daniel straightened and tried a different tone. Calm. Reasonable. The tone he used when he wanted me to sound unstable by comparison. He said, "The paperwork is legal. It was obtained by fraud. It was signed. You lied about what it was." He lifted his chin. "The house is mine now." That was the first time he said it plainly. There are moments when a thing becomes so clear that emotion almost disappears. I had suspected greed. I had suspected planning. Hearing my son claim my house to my face turned suspicion into fact. He had not drifted into this. He had chosen it. Was I overreacting? I still ask that only because I know what some people say when a son crosses a line with just enough paperwork to confuse outsiders. They say it is a family dispute. They say it is messy. They say both sides are emotional. But standing there at my own door, hearing my son tell me my home belonged to him after lying me into a signature and leaving me trapped in Mexico, I did not feel confused at all. I said, "You need to leave." Daniel laughed once, without humor. "I don't think so." "You already did," I said. "You left, remember?" Emily said, "This doesn't have to turn ugly." I looked at her then. It already did. That silence was heavy because there was nothing left to pretend. Daniel tried guilt next. "After everything we've been dealing with, this is how you treat your own family?" I answered, "You mean after everything you did in my house?" He said, "We needed stability. You needed my property." His jaw set. "You always think the worst of me." "No," I said. "I think the truth of you has finally caught up." He did not step forward after that. Not because he respected the boundary, because he was measuring risk. He knew, even then, that the locks meant I had moved before he could settle the story in his favor. He knew I had likely seen the file. He knew I was not standing there uncertain anymore. I told him the police had reports. I told him I had photographs. I told him I had legal counsel. Daniel tried to brush that off, but I saw the first genuine crack then. He said, "You went to a lawyer?" "Yes." "For what?" I said, "For what you did." That ended the performance for a second. Emily spoke next, and her voice was softer than his but no less useful to him. "Michael, maybe we should all calm down." I said, "That would have been a better idea before you both boarded another flight." She lowered her eyes. Daniel answered for her. He always did when the facts got sharp. He said, "We rebooked because it made sense." "For whom?" "For the family." There it was again. I asked, "Did it make sense to take my passport too?" He did not answer that. He moved instead to the one thing he thought still protected him. "The deed is signed," he said. "That's what matters." That was when I knew the case would not end at my front door. Daniel believed paper would beat truth if he held on to it hard enough. He had probably counted on me being too embarrassed, too tired, or too intimidated to challenge him. He did not understand that once a father sees clearly, endurance stops helping the wrong person. The dispute moved toward court after that. There was no repairing it in a hallway. No family meeting was going to undo what he had already admitted. Lisa Chen prepared the challenge to the deed. I preserved every detail I could. The police continued looking into the abandonment in Mexico and the missing valuables from my house. What mattered next was not emotion, it was sequence. Lisa walked me through it piece by piece. She said, "The misrepresentation of the document is central. I know. The Mexico incident supports intent. I know. The missing items from the home help us show conduct, not just one bad signature." I looked at the file on her desk. He thought I'd stay quiet. Lisa said, "A lot of people count on that." In the weeks that followed, more came to light. Investigators found Daniel had been carrying significant debt. That answered motive without changing the core truth. He had needed money, and my house looked like a solution. It also came out that he had been trying to determine the home's value before all this. That answered something else that had bothered me from the beginning. Those questions about neighborhood prices had not been curiosity. They had been preparation. I remember saying, "So he was planning around the house before Mexico." Lisa nodded. "That is what it looks like." Nothing about that surprised me anymore. It only hardened the line between what he said and what he meant. When Daniel told me he was thinking about the family, he was really thinking about leverage. When he talked about the future, he meant one that reduced me to a signature, and that still was not the end of what surfaced. Police later found the valuables missing from my home in a storage unit Daniel had rented. I did not need that discovery to know what he had done. But the discovery mattered because it removed another place he could hide. It turned suspicion into inventory. It gave shape to absence. It proved that while I was stranded, he had not simply been careless with my things. He had taken them and put them aside. That was the moment the whole structure of his story began to collapse. At the end of one meeting, Lisa said, "This is no longer just your word against his." I asked, "Was it ever?" She did not answer immediately. Then she said, "Now it won't look that way to anyone else. Maybe you would have given him one more chance. Maybe some fathers would. But by then the pattern was complete. The airport, the passport, the wallet, the phone, the laptop signature, the deed, the missing valuables, the storage unit, the debts, the home valuation. Every step pointed in one direction. Daniel had not made one terrible choice. He had built a plan. And plans have a way of sounding confident right up until they are read in court. By the time the case reached the courtroom in Seattle, I had already gone over the timeline so many times that it no longer felt like memory. It felt like structure. Daniel depended on confusion. I depended on sequence. That mattered. A lie can sound polished when it stands alone. It becomes much weaker when every step before and after it is placed beside it. I remember Daniel looking composed when the proceedings began. He wore the same expression he had worn at the airport before he sent me for water. Settled, controlled, certain he could still manage the story. Emily stayed close to him, quiet in the same practiced way I had seen before. Lisa Chen sat beside me with the file laid out in order. I was grateful for that order. It gave the whole thing a spine. The deed was central, of course. Daniel's side leaned on the one thing they had from the start, my signature. He wanted the case to begin and end there. Signed is signed. That was the line beneath every other line. But a real story does not stop at one page, and neither did ours. Lisa laid out the circumstances of the signature. Daniel had told me the document was related to medical decision-making. He had rushed me through it on a laptop screen. He had pointed to where I should sign. He had not disclosed that the document transferred ownership of my house. That misrepresentation mattered because consent built on a lie is not real consent. When I testified, I kept my voice even. I was not there to perform injury. I was there to tell the truth in the clearest form possible. Lisa asked, "Did Daniel tell you that you were signing a deed of gift?" "No," I said. "What did he tell you?" "That it was an update for medical decision paperwork." "Did you intend to transfer your home to Daniel?" "No." "Did you know that was the legal effect of the document?" "No." The room stayed quiet after those answers, and that quiet had weight. Then came the Mexico trip. Lisa did not use it for drama, she used it for intent. Daniel asked me to leave the gate for water and snacks. When I returned, Daniel and Emily had boarded another flight to Denver. My passport, wallet, and phone were gone. I had $20 and no way to contact anyone. I had to report the matter to police and obtain an emergency passport through the U.S. consulate. Those facts were not random cruelty. They fit with the deed. They showed planning. They showed the benefit Daniel gained by keeping me delayed and disoriented while he moved ahead. Daniel tried to make it sound careless rather than deliberate. That did not hold up well. At one point, the question came plainly: why would a son leave his father behind and take the items needed for him to travel home? There was no innocent answer that matched the facts. Not with the deed, not with the missing valuables, not with what came next. Investigators had already uncovered Daniel's debts. They had also uncovered evidence that he had been trying to value my house before the transfer. That gave the court what motives often need: context that had existed before the final act. Daniel had not suddenly stumbled into a misunderstanding. He had been moving toward the house as an answer to his own financial problems. I remember hearing that part summarized and thinking how ordinary his planning had looked while it was happening. Questions about market value, questions about the future, questions about legal order. Nothing dramatic on its own, but when placed together, they stopped being harmless. The storage unit mattered too. Police had found the valuables missing from my home in a unit Daniel rented. That discovery gave the court something more than disagreement over a document. It showed conduct consistent with taking control over property that was not his. It also undercut any claim that he had been acting openly and honestly. Honest ownership does not usually begin with hidden belongings. Daniel still tried to hold on to tone. He still tried to sound practical. Even in court, he leaned toward the language he always used with me. This was for the family. That line did not land the way he wanted, because now everyone could see what family meant in his mouth. It meant using guilt to avoid scrutiny. It meant acting first and explaining later. It meant taking what he wanted and expecting the word family to soften the theft. I watched him during the arguments and realized something difficult but useful. Daniel had spent a long time mistaking my restraint for weakness. He thought because I did not yell, I would not fight. He thought because I had been patient, I would remain passive. He thought age made me easier to move aside. A lot of people make that mistake with older men who still know exactly what belongs to them. What struck me during the hearing was how ordinary Daniel still tried to make everything sound. He wanted the court to look at isolated moments, never the line connecting them, a signature by itself, a flight change by itself, missing property by itself, debt by itself. None of it was meant to be seen together. That was the same strategy he used at home. Keep each act just small enough, just separate enough, and maybe the person being pushed will doubt his own judgment. But courts, like older men who have finally stopped excusing things, can recognize a pattern when it is laid out in order. There was also something important in hearing my own account spoken back in that setting. Outside a courtroom, people often rush to soften family betrayal. They ask whether tempers were high. They ask whether words were misunderstood. They ask whether everyone involved was under stress. In court, the facts had to stand without those cushions. Did Daniel misrepresent the document? Yes. Did he benefit from leaving me stranded and delayed? Yes. Were my missing belongings later found in a storage unit he rented? Yes. Once stripped of excuses, the story looked exactly like what it was. The judge reviewed the evidence, the sequence, the misrepresentation, and the surrounding conduct. The decision did not come as a speech about morals. It came as a legal conclusion, and that was enough for me. The court found that Daniel had deceived me in order to obtain the deed. The transfer was declared invalid. Ownership of the house remained with me, Michael Carter. I felt no triumph in that moment, only gravity. Daniel looked at me once after the ruling, but I did not read regret in his face. I read the shock of a man discovering that paperwork cannot protect a lie forever when the pattern around it is exposed. Emily said nothing. There was nothing left for either of them to say that had not already been weighed. Outside the courtroom, Lisa said, "The house is legally yours. The deed is void." I answered, "It was always mine." She gave a small nod. Now the record matches that. That sentence mattered more than I expected. Because that was what the case had become by the end. Not a battle to win something new, a battle to restore what had already been true before Daniel tried to rewrite it. My house, my name, my decision, my boundary. I had protected the evidence. I had changed the locks. I had reported everything. I had stayed calm when calm was harder than shouting. And the truth had held. Would you have done anything differently after all of that? When I left the courthouse, I did not feel restored to the man I had been before Puerto Vallarta. Some things do not return to their earlier shape, but I did feel clear, and clarity is stronger than comfort. Daniel had tried to take my home with a signature he tricked me into giving, with time bought by leaving me stranded in another country, and with the confidence that I would not push back hard enough to stop him. He was wrong. After the ruling, I went back to the house with the valid key in my pocket, and the court's decision still fresh in my mind. Maybe some people would have called that closure. I did not. Closure suggests neatness. This was not neat. My son had tried to erase me from my own property and failed. The court had said what needed saying, but the weight of it remained. Even so, there was one fact that mattered above the rest. The house was still mine. I still wonder what you would have done after that. I walked room to room again, not to search this time, but to stand in the truth of what had been defended. The locks were mine. The desk was mine. The walls Daniel had moved through like an owner were still mine. Even the silence felt different now. Not lighter exactly, just honest. In the days that followed, practical decisions replaced the courtroom. Some of that work was simple. Some of it was final. I reviewed my will. That was not a dramatic moment. It did not need to be. Daniel had already shown me what he believed access meant, what he believed trust was worth, and what he would do if paper gave him an opening. I was not going to leave another opening. I changed my will so that Daniel would no longer inherit the house. That was not revenge. It was the last necessary boundary. When I signed those revised documents, I read every page. I read every line slowly. I read where my name appeared and where it did not. Paper had become a motif of betrayal in my life, but it also became the way I took control back. The same kind of thing Daniel used to hide his intentions was now the thing I used openly and carefully. There was something fitting in that. A document can be a trap when one man lies over it. It can also be protection when truth sits clearly on the page. I thought back to the laptop in my kitchen, Daniel pointing, right there, Emily saying, "It'll take 2 seconds." My own hand moving without enough caution. That memory no longer embarrassed me the way it first had. I understood it better. He had not outsmarted me because he was brilliant. He had succeeded briefly because he used the oldest leverage there is inside a family: trust, urgency, and the fear of conflict. A few people might hear this story and ask why I let Daniel and Emily live with me rent-free in the first place. Others might ask why I signed something on a laptop without reading closely. Those are fair questions. I have asked them myself, but they are not the center of the story. The center is what Daniel chose to do with the trust he had. Age did not create his character. Pressure did not create it either. It revealed it. I remember one of our last direct exchanges after the ruling. Daniel was no longer speaking like a man in control by then, but he was still trying to bend the language. He said, "So that's it?" I answered, "That was your choice, not mine." He said, "You're cutting off your own son over a house." I looked at him and said, "No, I'm cutting off the son who tried to steal it." He had no answer that improved on silence. Emily spoke only once then. "This didn't have to happen." I said, "It didn't." That was the whole truth in 4 words. I do not know what Daniel told himself afterward. Maybe he called it bad luck. Maybe he called it misunderstanding. Maybe he still dressed it up as family business. People who live by manipulation usually keep reaching for the same language even after it fails. I no longer cared what story he preferred. The court had dealt with the deed. The police had found the items in the storage unit. The house remained with me. My will was changed. The line was closed. Even now, I do not think the hardest part was losing faith in Daniel. Hard things happen between parents and children. The hardest part was seeing how calmly he believed he could replace me inside my own life. That is a colder thing than anger. It is a decision. And once I understood that, peace stopped meaning reconciliation. It meant distance. What stayed with me most was not the courthouse, or even the airport in Puerto Vallarta. It was the front door. The old key failing in the lock. Daniel standing outside, hearing his own access disappear. That moment captured the whole story better than any argument. He thought presence was ownership. He thought using my space long enough would make it his. He thought a document built on deceit and a few days of my absence would turn the house into something he could claim. Then he came home and the key no longer worked. That was the truth made physical. And there were other physical truths too. The emergency passport in my hand in Mexico, the legal file on my desk, the photographed evidence, the storage unit holding what he had removed, the valid key after the locks were changed. Some betrayals sound abstract until objects give them shape. Mine did. Every object in this story carried a piece of it. The passport told me I had been deliberately trapped. The file told me why. The key told me I was done giving ground. I have been asked, in one form or another, whether I forgive him. I do not build my life around that question. Forgiveness is often demanded from the wrong person too early so everyone else can feel comfortable again. I was not interested in comfort. I was interested in reality. The reality was that Daniel deceived me, abandoned me in another country, tried to take my house, removed valuables from it, and stood at my door insisting the property was his. I answered that reality with evidence, boundaries, and the law. That is enough. If there is any lesson in what happened, it is not dramatic. Read what you sign. Protect your home. Do not confuse silence with peace. And never let the word family do the work of truth. But even that is more lesson than I care to give. Life teaches what it teaches, whether we shape it into advice or not. What matters now is simple. I live in my house in Seattle. Daniel does not. He has no right to it in the present. He has no right to it in my will. The line is no longer open to argument. I did not win by yelling louder. I won by refusing to disappear inside my own story. For a while after everything ended, I would sometimes pause at my desk and look at papers longer than necessary. Not from fear, from memory. Then I would fold them, file them, and move on. That was my answer to what happened. Not obsession, not revenge. Order. Puerto Vallarta is still in my mind sometimes. Airports always will be now. I still remember the weight of that paper bag in my hand, the gate agent's careful voice, the moment my pockets came up empty, the cold understanding that my son had done it on purpose. I remember the emergency passport. I remember coming home to missing valuables and a legal file waiting on my desk. I remember changing the locks. I remember the scrape of Daniel's old key against a door that would not open. I remember the judge voiding the deed. I remember signing the revised will with full attention and a steady hand. That is the whole shape of it. A son tried to turn trust into ownership. He failed, and I stayed.